"Sign this," she said, sliding a document across my kitchen table at 7 in the morning. "And by Friday, the man who took everything from you will have nothing left." I stared at her. I'd opened the door expecting a delivery, maybe a neighbor. Instead, there was a woman I'd never met, holding a manila folder thick enough to be someone's entire life, and looking at me like she already knew my answer. Her name was Nora. And she was my business partner's fiancée. The same business partner who, 3 weeks earlier, had walked out of the firm we'd built together for 6 years and taken every client, every contract, and every design file with him. I should have closed the door. I didn't. "My name is Marcus Cole. I'm 32 years old. I'm an architect. Or I was, until my best friend since college decided that loyalty had an expiration date. Derek and I had started our firm, Cole and Harmon Design, out of a 2-room office in Austin when we were both 26. We had nothing. One laptop between us, a lease we could barely afford, and a shared belief that we were going to build something real. For 6 years, that belief held. We won regional awards. We landed commercial contracts. We hired a staff of 8. I designed. Derek handled clients and finances. We trusted each other completely because that's what you do when someone has been your closest friend since your freshman year of college. When he helped you move into your dorm room and you stayed up until 3 in the morning talking about what your lives were going to look like. I found out the truth on a Tuesday. Our accountant, a quiet man named Paul who wore the same cardigan every week, called me directly instead of Derek. That alone should have told me something. He said there were discrepancies. He said he'd been trying to reach Derek for 10 days. He said some of the firm's project accounts had been restructured without my knowledge, and that a separate LLC had been registered using our client list, our completed project portfolio, and my professional license number. My license number. The one tied to my name, my credentials, my entire career. I sat down on the floor of my office and stayed there for a while. Derek had been building an exit for at least a year. He'd quietly moved our top 5 clients to a new entity called Harmon Design Group, which existed on paper for 18 months before I ever heard the name. The portfolio he used to pitch those clients included projects I had designed alone. Projects where Derek had contributed nothing except his signature on the billing invoices. He had used my license to pull permits on 3 of those new contracts, meaning that legally, I was the architect of record on work I had never seen. If anything went wrong on those buildings, the liability would fall on me. When I finally reached Derek, he was calm. Almost bored. He said the firm had run its course. He said he'd been carrying the business side for years and that it was time for him to grow. He said he hoped I understood. He did not apologize. He did not offer to return the files. He hung up before I could finish a sentence. I spent the next 3 weeks in a kind of fog. I called a lawyer, who told me the situation was complicated. I called our former clients, most of whom either didn't return my calls or were awkwardly apologetic. I drove past our old office building once and saw new lettering on the glass. Harmon Design Group. Just his name. Like the 6 years we'd built together had been a rough draft he'd decided to cut. That was the week Nora knocked on my door. I let her in because something in her voice through the door wasn't desperate. It was precise. She wasn't asking for something. She was offering. She sat at my kitchen table and opened the folder and didn't say anything for a moment, just let me look. What I saw stopped my breath. Bank statements. LLC filings. Client contracts with my signature on them that I had never signed. A permit application dated 4 months ago with my license number attached to a project in Dallas I had never heard of. That's wire fraud, I said out loud. I don't know why I said it out loud. Maybe because saying it made it real. She nodded slowly. And identity theft, she said. And probably a few other things we haven't found yet. I looked at her. How do you have all of this? She folded her hands on the table. Because he did the same thing to my father, she said. 3 years ago, Nora's father was a structural engineer named Robert Vance who had partnered with Derek on a commercial project in San Antonio before Derek and I had even started our firm. Her father had done the engineering work. Derek had handled permits and client relations. When the project was complete and the developer paid out, Derek had restructured the payment through a shell account that her father never had access to. Her father spent a year trying to recover the money and couldn't prove enough to act. He died 18 months later of a heart attack. Nora believed, and she said this quietly without drama, that the stress of it had contributed. I looked at her for a long time after she said that. She wasn't crying. She was the kind of steady that comes from having already cried everything out a long time ago. Why me? I asked. Why come here? Because you're the current one, she said. What he did to my father was before either of you had a firm. What he's done to you is ongoing, documented, and traceable. You have standing I didn't have. And you have something my father never had. What's that? She reached into the folder and pulled out a single printed page. A text conversation. I recognized Derek's number. The other contact was labeled only with initials, C.P. I didn't know who that was yet. She pushed the page toward me and let me read. The first message, license still clean? The reply, spotless. He has no idea. Derek again, keep it that way until Dallas closes. After that, it doesn't matter what he finds. I read it 3 times. Each time felt like a different room in the same cold building. He was going to let Dallas close, I said. Whatever problem comes from those permits lands on me. That's the plan. She nodded. That's the plan. I looked at her again. You came here 3 weeks after he left the firm. How long have you been watching him? A while, she said. That wasn't an answer. I told her so. She picked up her coffee, looked at the window for a moment, then back at me. Long enough to know that you're the one person he never expected to fight back. The document she'd wanted me to sign wasn't a contract. It was a joint declaration, a formal statement combining her account of what Derek had done to her father with a detailed account of what he'd done to me. She'd had it drafted by a lawyer she'd worked with for 2 years, a woman who specialized in financial fraud and who had, apparently, been waiting for a case strong enough to move on. I didn't sign it that morning. I told Nora I needed a day. She said that was reasonable. She left me her number and the folder and walked out the same way she'd walked in. Like she'd done this before. I spent that afternoon reading everything. Every page. Then I spread the documents on my dining room table and took photos of each one. I called my own lawyer and read him the text exchange over the phone. I heard him exhale slowly. This is significant, he said. I know, I said. Sign the declaration, he said. I called Nora that evening. I'll sign it, I told her. But I want to understand what happens after. She said, we don't report it yet. We wait for him to move. I asked why. Because he has one more step in the plan, she said. The Dallas permit closes in 11 days. Once it does, he'll file an amendment to strip your license from the project retroactively and claim it was an administrative error. That will create a paper trail that makes it look like you improperly claimed credit for a project you weren't on. By the time you try to explain the real sequence, his story is already in the record. I closed my eyes. He's not just stealing from me, I said. He's building a version of events where I'm the one who did something wrong. She was quiet for a moment. He's very good at this, she said. But only when no one's paying attention. The next 11 days were the strangest of my life. I went to work, or what passed for work in the dismantled wreckage of the firm. I answered emails from vendors and tried to reassure the 3 staff members who hadn't yet left. I had dinner once with my brother, who knew something was wrong but didn't push. Nora and I started meeting every other evening. Not at my place, not at hers. A diner called Sutton's on the east side of the city, always the same corner booth, always after 8 when it was mostly empty. She would bring new documents. I would bring questions. One night, I asked her how she'd gotten Derek's texts. She looked at me with something close to amusement. He left his phone on a restaurant table once, she said. A long time ago. I had 30 seconds. You cloned it, I said. She stirred her coffee. I learned some things I found useful, she said. I laughed for the first time in weeks. I couldn't help it. She looked at me when I laughed, and something in her expression shifted just slightly, the way a room looks different when someone opens a window. We ate in silence for a while after that. On the 10th day, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. A man who introduced himself as a representative of the Dallas developer said he'd been reviewing project documentation and noticed some inconsistencies regarding the architect of record. He said it was probably just a clerical issue. He said Derek had flagged it and suggested they reach out to me directly to get a correction on file. My hand was steady when I held the phone. I told the man I'd look into it and call him back. I hung up and texted Nora 2 words. He moved. She replied in under a minute, good. Tonight, Sutton's, 9 o'clock. Bring everything. We sat in that corner booth until midnight. She laid out the sequence precisely. The amendment Derek was trying to file would misrepresent the original permit submission date. We had the original. We had time-stamped email records from my server showing I had no knowledge of the Dallas project. We had the text messages. And now we had the developer's call, which Nora told me to document in a written memo to myself dated and timed, because it established that Derek had actively initiated contact with a third party to alter the record. That's not just identity theft anymore, she said. That's obstruction. She called her lawyer from the booth. It was almost midnight. The lawyer picked up on the second ring. We're ready, Nora said. The next morning, we submitted everything. The joint declaration, the financial records, the text messages, the permit documentation, the timeline. Not to local police. To a federal investigator Nora had been in contact with for over a year, a man named Agent Carlisle who worked financial crimes and who, when Nora had first brought him her father's case, had told her the evidence wasn't actionable yet. It was actionable now. Agent Carlisle called me personally that afternoon. He asked me 3 questions. I answered all of them. He said, "Sit tight, don't contact Harmon. Don't tip off the Dallas developer. Let us work." I sat tight. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. 4 days later, Derek called me. I almost didn't answer. Then I thought about the text messages, the permit amendment, the version of me he'd been constructing in the record, and I picked up. "Hey," he said, casual as a Sunday afternoon. "I've been thinking about you." I said nothing. "Look, I know how this looks," he said. "I probably should have handled the transition better. I want to fix that. Maybe we could meet for coffee this week, talk through some of the project documentation questions that have come up." He was trying to get me to the table. He wanted me sitting across from him, nodding, agreeing, letting him walk me through his version of events before anyone else could. I said, "Sure, Derek." "Thursday?" He said, "Thursday's perfect." I hung up and called Nora. She listened. She said, "He's scared. He thinks you don't know enough to move yet. He wants to contain you." "And Thursday?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Thursday is fine," she said. "By Thursday, it won't matter." She was right. The arrest happened on Wednesday morning. I wasn't there for it. Agent Carlisle told me later that Derek had been at his office, in a meeting with the Dallas developers' legal team, which was almost poetically appropriate. They took him out of the conference room. The developers' lawyers were still sitting there when it happened. The charges were federal. Wire fraud. Identity theft. Fraudulent use of a professional license. Conspiracy to obstruct a licensing investigation. 8 counts in the initial indictment, with more under review. The man identified as C.P. in the texts, a paralegal at Derek's new firm named Craig Patel who had been helping him process the fraudulent permit amendments, was brought in the same afternoon. I was sitting in my car outside a coffee shop when Nora called me. "It's done," she said. I sat there and didn't say anything for a moment. The street outside was normal. People walking. A delivery truck idling at the corner. The ordinary surface of a day that felt entirely different underneath. "Thank you," I said finally. She said, "You did the work too." I said, "Nora, I'm serious." She was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "You're welcome." There was a hearing 6 weeks later at which Nora and I were both present as witnesses. We sat in a hallway outside the courtroom for 2 hours waiting to be called. We didn't talk much. She had a paperback. I stared at the floor. At one point she put her book down and said, without looking at me, "My father would have liked you." I didn't know what to say to that. I said, "Tell me about him." She did. For 40 minutes in that courthouse hallway, she told me about a structural engineer who had loved his work, who had coached her soccer team when she was 12, who had made the same terrible pun every time she ordered eggs at breakfast, who had spent the last year of his life going through files and bank statements trying to prove something to someone who wouldn't listen. By the time they called her name, her eyes were dry. She stood up, smoothed her jacket, and walked through the door without looking back. Derek accepted a plea agreement. Reduced charges in exchange for cooperation on identifying 2 other potential victims of similar schemes in different states. He received a sentence of 4 years. Craig Patel received 18 months. The Dallas project permit was voided and the liability that had been attributed to my license was formally expunged from the record. My lawyer said I had grounds for a civil suit to recover damages from the diverted firm revenue. I thought about it for a long time and decided not to pursue it. Not because I forgave Derek. I didn't. But because I was tired of living inside a case that had already taken up enough of my life, and because the money that mattered most, the professional record I'd spent 6 years building, had already been returned to me. Cole Design reopened 3 months after the plea agreement. Just me and 2 of the staff members who had stayed, operating out of a smaller office 2 blocks from the original. The first week back, I got a call from a client Derek had taken. They wanted to work with me directly. The week after that, another. I had coffee with Nora on a Saturday in October, at a place she'd chosen, not Sutton's, somewhere newer and brighter with large windows overlooking the street. She looked different outside of diner lighting at 9 at night. Less like someone preparing for a fight. She told me she'd started consulting work, helping a nonprofit that assisted small business owners navigate fraud recovery. She said it was the first thing she'd done in years that felt like it had a forward direction. I told her the firm was rebuilding slowly. That I still woke up some mornings bracing for a call that something had gone wrong. That I was learning, slowly, the difference between caution and fear. She wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at me across the table and said, "You know what I think the hardest part is?" "What?" "Trusting that it's over," she said. "That you don't have to keep checking." I thought about that for a long time after I got home. We started meeting for coffee regularly after that. Not at diners late at night. Not with folders between us. Just two people sitting across from each other in the ordinary daylight, talking about work and the city and the books she read and the projects I was drawing. There was nothing transactional about it. There was nothing she needed from me and nothing I was trying to prove. One evening in December, we were walking back to our cars after dinner and she stopped at the corner and looked up at a building I'd pointed out earlier, an older converted warehouse with clean lines and good bones that some developer had turned into offices. "Did you work on anything like that?" she asked. I said yes, once, early on. Before the firm grew. When Derek and I were still doing everything ourselves. She looked at it for another moment. Then she said, "You should do that again." Something like that. I asked why. "Because when you talked about it," she said, "you looked like yourself." I didn't have an answer to that. We stood there for a little while in the December cold, looking up at a building I hadn't thought about in years, and something that had been wound tight in my chest for a long time felt just slightly like it was beginning to loosen. I don't know what Nora and I are. I'm not sure that's the right question yet. What I know is that she came to my door on a morning when I had nothing left to lose, and instead of offering me sympathy, she offered me something better. She offered me a way to fight back. She never pretended it was about anything other than what it was. She never asked me to trust her before she earned it, and she earned it. I still have the folder she left on my kitchen table that first morning. I kept it after the case closed, not because I need it. The documents have been submitted, entered into the record, filed away in systems I'll never have to think about again. I kept it because when I look at it on the shelf, I don't feel what I expected to feel. I don't feel angry. I feel something quieter than that. Like evidence that I didn't fold. The last time I talked to my lawyer about the case, he said something I've thought about often since. He said most people in your situation never fight it. They absorb the loss. They move on, they tell themselves it wasn't worth the trouble. He said the ones who do fight back usually do it wrong, too loud, too early, too emotional. He said what you did was different. You waited, you documented, you built the case before you made a move. I told him I couldn't take credit for that. There was someone else who built most of it. He said, "Then you were smart enough to let her." I'm not sure that's a lesson exactly. I'm not sure it generalizes into something clean and transferable. What I know is this. When someone appears at your door with evidence that the person you trusted most has been constructing a version of reality where you're the fall guy, you have two choices. You can close the door. Or you can pour 2 cups of coffee and find out what they know. I poured the coffee. And the man who thought I was too soft to fight back is currently wearing a county-issued bracelet in a halfway house in South Texas, and I am sitting in my office on the 4th floor of a building I chose, drawing plans for a converted warehouse on the east side of the city. The client found me through a referral. When she called to introduce herself, she mentioned that she'd asked around about local firms and that my name had come up more than once. She said people told her I was someone who showed up and did what I said I would do. I thought about Nora when she said that. I thought about a courthouse hallway and a corner booth and a December street corner and a woman who had spent 3 years carrying a folder that most people would have thrown away. I texted her that evening. Just one line. Got a new client. Warehouse project. She replied 20 minutes later. Show me when you have drawings. I said I would. And I meant it.